thought I'd get a different background. So I'm sitting in my Tesla Model 3 SR Plus, videoing some of this. A common question that people get asked of an electric vehicle is, how far can it go? I've already done a video on that. And the other one is, how long does it take to recharge? So in this video, I'm going to explain some of the facts relating to recharging your EV. So being an Englishman from London, mate, I've got a bit of a sarcastic sense of humour. So my usual initial answer to is, how long does it take to charge, is 10 seconds. 5 seconds to plug it in, 5 seconds to unplug it. And of course, in the meantime, I go off, have a sleep, have a coffee, have a restroom break, etc. Maybe have lunch, just depends. So that was the short answer. The long answer is, how long's a piece of string? It's not the easiest thing to answer because it's very variable, and it depends on the size of the battery in the car, the output that the charging port, whatever, can give your car, what's the maximum charge rate that your car can accept, because that's different for many vehicles. What was your starting state of charge, and the shape of the charging curve. Those last two apply more to the fast DC charging rather than the simple AC charging. So first up, the size of the battery. Obviously, the bigger the battery, the longer it's going to take to charge, all other things being equal. So, you know, you've got the lower range vehicles which would have 40, 50 kilowatt hours worth of battery in them. This vehicle here, the Tesla Model 3 SR Plus, it's a couple of years old. It's got the NCA type battery and it's only 50 kilowatt hours. Then you can, it's the same actually as the short range BYD Atto 3 that I've just done a video on. Then you got the mid range, which is 60, 70, 75 kilowatt hour of batteries. So the long range BYD Atto 3 has got a 60.4 kilowatt hour battery in it. The new Tesla Model 3 rear wheel drive has got a 60 kilowatt hour battery in it, and that's an LFP. Then you go into the 75, 80 up to 100 kilowatt hour batteries. So the Tesla long range and performance, depending upon which year they are, they've got between 75 and 80 odd kilowatts. Models S and X are 75 to 100 depending upon the model. So, you know, the 50 kilowatt hour battery and the 100 kilowatt hour battery, one's going to take a lot longer to charge, and it also comes down to your starting charge level and your finishing charge level. Most manufacturers always they're not always accurate in their assessment of how quick the vehicle will charge. It's like their assessment of how far it will go. That's always overestimated. Well, charging rate is always underestimated, because it sounds better if they say it'll only take 15 minutes to fully charge your vehicle. Yeah, better than saying it'll take 35 minutes. So they always will underestimate. So let's start with AC charging first. You've got at home your standard 10 amp socket, the same one you plug your kettle into. Now 10 amps, 220, 240 volts is just over 2 kilowatts per hour. If you've got a 15 amp socket and an EVSE that can take the 15 amps, then you'll get 15 amps times 220, 240, which is about 3.5 kilowatts per hour. So basically, if you've got a 50 kilowatt battery at 2 kilowatts an hour, you're looking at 25 hours to go from flat to full. However, most people with an EV charge overnight, so overnight you get home, you can plug the car in, 10 hours, you can easily add 20 kilowatts, which you could be looking, at about 100 to 120 kilometers of range added overnight. For those of you that have got a 32 amp circuit, which is the highest one that you can get, and you can put what's called an HPWC, high power wall connector, you can get up to just over 7 kilowatts an hour. So 7 kilowatts, 50 kilowatt battery, you can go from flat to full overnight quite easily. Now that would be on single phase. If you can get 3-phase, then you can get up to 11 kilowatts, because it's actually only 16 amps per phase, so you get 11 kilowatts. If you're lucky and you've got an older Model S, they sometimes have 2 inverters on board, so you can get 22 kilowatts per hour. But most cars on AC are limited to either 7 or 11 kilowatts per hour. So in my Model 3, standard range, few years old, it's got the NCA battery, 50 kilowatts. If I go down to the local shopping centre, I can get 11 kilowatts there on the 3-phase, and so I can charge the battery from flat to full in smidge over 4 hours. At home I get 7 kilowatts, so it's 7 hours, but I never go flat, I'll never go full. So charging at home on AC overnight is really very easy to do. I think 90 to 95% of EV owners do that. Try that with a nice car. You can't make petrol at home and fill up your car. So that's about it for AC charging. DC charging is a completely different kettle of fish, and it's a bit more complicated. So with DC charging, DC chargers can output anything from as little as 22 kilowatts right the way up to 350 kilowatts, which is great, but then the car has got to be able to accept that charge rate. Now cars can accept probably between 50 to 350 kilowatts depending upon the car. So this Tesla Model 3 SR Plus, a few years old, will take up to 170 kilowatts an hour maximum, and it only does that for a short period of time, as I'll explain in a minute. The newer models, the long range and the performance, can accept up to 250 kilowatts per hour, which is what the version 3 Tesla superchargers can put out. They can put out 250 and the car can take it. But you've got something called a charging curve, just to complicate things. What that is, it's basically, it really depends upon the state of charge that you start with, the temperature and general condition of the battery. So if it's really cold, it's not going to accept the charge. The beauty of Teslas, if you navigate to a Tesla supercharger, the car is intelligent enough to make the battery get to the right temperature as you arrive so that it can accept the maximum charging rate and therefore charge in the shortest period of time. So the charging curve is different depending upon the car, the model, the make, the battery type and so on. I actually did an experiment with this car, which is standard range plus with NCA batteries, and compared it to the made in China Model 3 standard range plus with the LFP battery. So we both navigated to a supercharger and we both arrived with under 20%, and we plugged them in and we looked at the charging rates at 20, 30, 40, etc. up to 90%. So we basically timed going from 20% to 90% state of charge in the battery, having preconditioned the battery and everything else being equal, because we drove down at exactly the same time, basically behind each other far enough not to create drag and so on. Now what happened was my NCA batteries sucked in the power a lot faster at the beginning but then slowed down more, whereas the LFP battery took a lot longer to get up to a particular charge rate, but then it didn't slow down as fast. So when we were at 20%, I was accepting 10-15 kilowatts an hour more than the LFP, but when we hit 80 and 90%, the LFP car was accepting several kilowatts an hour more than mine. And what happened was, to go from 20% to 90%, it took us both a smidge over half an hour. His took 32 minutes, mine took 33 minutes, give or take. So really there wasn't a huge amount of difference. Some of the newer cars, it's going to make a huge difference. The Ioniq 5 can accept quite a high charge rate, and they claim you can add 100 k's range in 5 minutes, and it does. And you can go from, I forget, 20 to 80% in about 18 minutes. So yeah, that's pretty reasonable. So to answer the question, how long does it take to charge your car? As I say, I always answer 10 seconds, 5 to plug it in, 5 to unplug it. But it's still a matter of how long's that piece of string. You can't say for sure because it depends on so many factors. With AC charging, piece of cake, you can calculate it out because there really isn't much of a charging curve there until you get up to the high 90% charge. But as I said, most EV owners wake up in the morning and they've got a full tank of electrons. 90 to 95% of people do that. I tend not to do that anymore. That's what I used to do when I was working. Now I'm retired, I can plug my car in quite happily during the day and fill it up with a trickle charge from my solar panels on the roof of the house, and I keep it topped up fairly regularly like that. Once you own an EV, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So don't get hung up on, oh, how quick does it charge? Just forget it, because if you're on a long journey, that's probably where it matters the most. And if you can get to a Tesla supercharger with a Tesla or one of the really rapid chargers and your car will take it, that's great. But it doesn't matter. The Atto 3 that I did a video on this week, it'll only take 80 kilowatts charge an hour tops. So to go from 0 to 100%, and it's an LFP battery, so you can quite happily take it to 100%, it could take it 90 minutes. But most people aren't going to do that. You just top up what you need. When you're on the long journey, it's actually better to top up smaller amounts more frequently than to go for a long distance and then fill it up more. As I said, that charging curve, once you hit the higher percentages, it really does slow down. So with a Tesla in this one, with the NCA batteries, I can get to 80% fairly quickly, 80 to 90%, slowed down quite a bit. It's only taking 25 kilowatts an hour. By the time it hits 90%, it's dropping down. By the time it gets to 95%, it's almost in single figures kilowatts per hour charge. And it can take as long to go from 90 to 100% in this as it does to get from 20 to 90%. So doing small frequent charges is a much better idea. And the other thing is, small frequent stops keeps you refreshed, and it's a much safer way to drive. I can't go for longer than 2 hours without needing to stop with an old body, bladder problems and so on. But I also like to get out and have a stretch. Even when I had a car that would do 1,000 kilometers on a tank of diesel, I didn't. I used to drive for 3 hours and get out and stretch my legs, maybe have a coffee, but at least just take a break. You find that you need it, certainly I do. And these people that say, well, I'm not going to buy an EV until it can do 1,000 Ks because I drive 1,000 Ks in one hit. Well, quite honestly, you're stupid. You're dangerous. You're the sort of people that cause accidents because you're driving tired. So EVs, I wouldn't worry about charging time. People without an EV who are thinking of buying one, it's their main concern. So just explain to them, look, it doesn't take very long to charge, 10 seconds, and you go off and do something else. Alright, I hope that was helpful. Thanks very much. Don't forget to click like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. Cheers.